Hi and welcome back to the channel. When I talked about public domain movies, I mentioned One-Eyed Jacks, the Marlon Brando directed movie from 1961, which was a movie that had been a little bit on my radar, but I really didn't know a lot about. So I thought I'd dive deeper into it. I hadn't seen the movie since I was a kid, and so I thought I'd give it a go and just take a look at it. And I found that it was a much more interesting movie than I'd first thought. I did a bit of deep dive research into One-Eyed Jacks, and my source material was mostly this. A book by Carlo Fiore talking about his friendship with Marlon Brando, and towards the end of his professional relationship with Brando, he made One-Eyed Jacks with Brando as a producer, sort of. And he has a lot of stuff to say about that. None of it reflects particularly badly on Brando, but it just shows a little bit of his idiosyncrasies as an actor, as a person, and in this one instance as a director. Let's look at the pre-production first. The pre-production was kind of interesting. Rod Serling, the Twilight Zone guy, was interested in adapting a novel which relocated the Billy the Kid story to the Monterey coast of California. It was quite popular at the time. Serling wrote a script, then the rights to the novel was sold to Marlon Brando's production company, and Sam Peckinpah, the director who did Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia and The Wild Bunch, wrote a script for it, and his script was kind of okay. A couple of other people had a pass at it, including a novelist called Calder Willingham, and Brando's production company cut a deal with Paramount Studios to make the movie. Then things get interesting. Originally, this is about around 1958. Brando wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct. This is before he became really big with Lolita and with Spartacus. And so he and Brando worked out a partnership. They were talking about who they were going to cast in various roles. Brando wanted Carl Morden to play the other main role, the father figure for the character Brando was playing, Rio, a character called Dad Longworth. Brando wanted his old friend Carl Morden, with whom he'd worked in Streetcar Named Desire, amongst other things. But Kubrick didn't think that Carl Malden was the right person for the role. Carl Malden, he said, played losers most of the time. Kubrick wanted somebody who was not going to look like a loser. Kubrick's suggestion was that they get Spencer Tracy to play Dad Longworth. But Brando wasn't fond of that. He wanted Carl Malden. He had a relationship with him. He could play off him very well. And so eventually it came to a head with that and a few other issues. And Brando sacked Stanley Kubrick. Now, Stanley Kubrick was kind of okay with this because he found out that Brando himself was going to direct the movie. And Kubrick said that it's okay, if he's going to direct the movie, then the industry will think that I got the sack because the star wanted to direct the movie, not because they wanted to get a better director, so it wouldn't have any impact on Stanley Kubrick's career, which of course went on to great success after that. Problem is, Marlon Brando had never directed a movie. So the pre-production process went on for 2 years. It cost Paramount Studios $500,000 before a foot of film was shot, which was a lot of money for things like that in those days. And then they went on location and started shooting the movie. They get on location in Big Sur in the northern coast of California. Beautiful countryside, great waves, fantastic trees, an incredibly picturesque place. And after the first day of shooting, they were 5 days behind. They shot half a page of script when they should have shot 4 or 5 pages of script, which, crunching the numbers, left them 5 days behind in the production after the first day. The producers were not happy with this. Brando shot a lot of footage of the ocean waves on the coast of California because he wanted to have the perfect waves breaking as he shot his scenes. And that took a lot of time and it cost a lot of money. But Brando persisted. Also, there were a couple of issues with casting as well. Brando needed a female actor to play the love interest Louisa, and he didn't want anybody really famous. He also said he didn't want a busty actor, so he sent his people down to Mexico City to audition a few people, and they came up with an actor called Pina Pellicer, who was kind of inexperienced. She'd done stage production in Mexico City playing Anne Frank, but had never been in front of a camera before. That caused a few issues because here she is in front of a camera alongside one of the biggest actors in Hollywood, and for the middle part of the 20th century, on stage and in Hollywood. Brando was that big at the time. The other problem is she couldn't ride a horse, and the movie required her to ride a horse, so they had to get her doing that. And the other problem they had with her was she had problems reacting to things in a way that was believable and cinematic. She has to react to Slim Pickens playing one of the villains, and the reaction just didn't go right until Brando shot a gun off unexpectedly and got the right reaction from the actor. Now, Pina Pellicer was a woman with a lot of trouble, and unfortunately she committed suicide in 1965. I don't think it at all related to her experience in One-Eyed Jacks. She just had mental health issues. So anyway, that was one of the problems. The other problem was that Brando wanted a friend of his to play his best friend in the movie, a character called Modesto, with whom Brando's character Rio escapes from jail. So he got his stand-in to do it, a guy called Larry Duran, who hadn't acted before. He'd been a stand-in, he was there in costume so the lights could get set up before Brando turned up on stage, but he'd never acted. And so they didn't get the reactions from Larry Duran that they wanted, and they had to do a lot of stuff back in the studio later on to cover for it. Particularly at a scene at the end where he confronts one of the other villains, played really, really well by Ben Johnson, who a decade and a half later won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for The Last Picture Show. So there were a lot of trouble making this film. It was behind schedule. It took an incredibly long time to film. They filmed about 6 hours too much film. Brando wanted to make a long film. He wanted to tell a complex story, and the studios weren't happy. They re-edited it themselves, and Brando shot a hell of a lot of film and cost them a hell of a lot of money. In a financial sense, One-Eyed Jacks was an incredible disaster for Paramount Studios. Later on, of course, the movie fell into the public domain, and if you go onto eBay, you'll find a whole bunch of $7 to $10 editions of this movie using some really bad source material. However, Universal Studios, working with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, did a restoration in 4K of this movie quite recently, which then was released by Criterion. And that makes it a bit complicated, because if you look at the old versions of it, the ones that are from really dodgy source material, those ones are in the public domain, but the 4K restoration is not in the public domain. As I said in my public domain video last week, public domain is a minefield. It is a complex subject. So you can watch the old crappy version of One-Eyed Jacks for free. But the version you want to see, the Criterion Edition one, is not in the public domain. And I suggest, if you're able to, either watch it on the Criterion channel or buy the discs, because it looks choice. So is the movie any good? Well, I probably should tell you what it's about now, after I've given you all of that information about the pre-production and everything. The movie's about a guy called Rio, who is a bank robber, along with another guy called Dad Longworth, played by Carl Malden. They're chased by the federales in Mexico and get bailed up by them in the desert. Dad Longworth goes off to find them some fresh horses, because one of the horses has died and the other one's not doing too well. And taking the gold with him, leaves Rio behind, and Rio goes to jail in Mexico for 5 years. Rio escapes and goes north and finds that Dad Longworth has reinvented himself as an upright citizen in Monterey, California. He's a local sheriff. He is at a center of power. He's married a Hispanic woman played by Katie Gerardo, who has a daughter from a previous marriage, Louisa, played by Pina Pellicer. Rio goes up and reacquaints himself with Dad Longworth. He doesn't tell him that he was in prison, and Dad Longworth is quite uncomfortable with Rio being in town. There's a fiesta in town over the next couple of days, and Rio, being a bit of a ladies' man, has a liaison with Louisa, and over the period of the movie falls in love with her. Now, Rio, in the meantime, has taken up with a whole bunch of other bank robbers who plan to rob the bank in Monterey, California, among whom are Ben Johnson's character. Dad Longworth finds out about their plans, captures Rio, ties him up to a hitching post, whips him, and crushes his gun hand. Rio and his gang then go up the coast a little bit to a little fishing community run by a couple of Chinese guys, where he heals up and gets himself back together so he can go back in town and confront Dad and as a side issue, rob the bank. The movie goes on from there in a fairly predictable way in some ways, but there are a whole bunch of different little subplots there. There's the sheriff's deputy, played by Slim Pickens, who wants to get with Louisa. There's Dad Longworth's relationship with his wife, and there's the tension between Rio and the other guys who are just waiting around for Rio to heal before they go and rob the bank. They are not inclined to wait. I'm not going to give you the spoilers on the last part of the film, but that's pretty much the start of the plot and the engine of the plot. So the question is it a good movie? And is it worth your time? Here's my verdict. It is one of the most beautiful westerns I've ever seen. Using the Monterey coast instead of the usual desert and plains locations for a western really works. Brando shot it beautifully. It looks sumptuous. There are some really great camera angles. He uses the coastline and the landscapes fantastically, and Brando himself is good in the role. A lot of the dialogue was improvised by the actors, and some actors were better at it than others, but there is real tension in it. In spite of what Brando wanted, it does turn out to be a kind of western in traditional ways. There's a love interest, there's a conflict with the father figure being Dad Longworth. The name is very indicative of that. But it works. The action scenes are kind of crisp. They're filmed a little differently. It's filmed strategically. The characters are planning and working around strategically rather than just standing in the middle of the main street of a town for a gunfight. And for me it worked. There's a jailbreak which works really nicely and has a certain uncertainty about it. You don't know whether Rio's going to be able to jailbreak or not. And I think it's worthwhile. I don't think it's the best western in the world, because that could be any one of 15 westerns that I really like, but I think it's an honest western. I think it's interesting, and I think that the fact that Brando directed it and had so much to do with the production makes it a very idiosyncratic movie. But it does look great. I like most of the characters, and allowing for the weak acting by a couple of the actors, it does really work. And I think it's one of those kind of, if you're into westerns, it's definitely a bucket list western for you to watch. But again, as I said, please watch a quality version of it, because the cinematography, which was nominated for an Academy Award, is incredibly good. It was criticised at the time. People said it looked like a South Sea Island movie, and where the landscapes are very important. But I like the locations, I like the setting, and I like the way it was filmed by Marlon Brando, in spite of the fact he spent a hell of a lot of money doing it. Well, it's a bit over 2 hours, so it's not the shortest western in the world, but it's an honest one, and it's worth checking out. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you'd like to, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and leave a comment and let me know what you think of One-Eyed Jacks. Whether you've seen the quality version or whether you've seen the kind of dodgy public domain versions. I'd be interested to see how other people reacted to it, because I think that it was surprisingly better than I thought it would be, because you tend to have a little bit of a mental thing about public domain movies, and you kind of downgrade them a little bit for the fact that they fell into the public domain. But for me, this one never should have. I think that it deserved better than it got from many, many people. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I will catch you next time. In the meantime, watch good movies, watch bad movies, watch Marlon Brando westerns, and I'll see you then.